We are disconnected from nature and responding mechanically to our own projections. We're living in an illusion. So part of the beauty of it is that you need to create your own scaffolding. No amount of me optimizing my physiology is going to optimize yours. You might be able to utilize some of the tools, but you need to do the gestures. And from that webinar I listened to by Jamie Wheal on adaptive leadership, he said a good quote, and I don't necessarily like quotes so much, but it was by Colin Powell, and he said that leadership is the art of taking people down roads they don't want to go, to places we all want to be. And I'm sure there's people out there, so I wouldn't say all, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who want their medications, have the med changes, go to psychiatrists, go to clinicians, go to the hospital. Some people want that. But I would think that a lot of people would love to feel healthy, have their wellness, design and live and create the life of one's dreams. And it's not necessarily a road initially that people want to go down. It's a scary road. But it leads to a place that we just might want to be. And another thing that I realized was that we get measured on our functionality based on a standardized life. Like they have standardized IQ tests that aren't necessarily accurate for measuring intelligence. Well, the standardized life isn't necessarily accurate for measuring functionality. So we need to create our new functions. These functions are new and higher than even the executive functions of the brain that we're currently aware of. And we can run better apps in our brain, which is creating our life instead of vegetating our life. And I was thinking again about what I've said before, creating the 100th manic syndrome. If 100 of us can master this, all of a sudden others will be able to master it without even trying. Because the 100th monkey syndrome is once the 100th monkey learns a skill, all the monkeys everywhere know that skill. Doesn't matter about time, distance, place, whatever.
Affect the morphomanic field. The morphomanic field.
And Jamie Wheal mentioned that they want more leaders leveling up quickly, and I want more people of my neurotribe leveling up quickly. If that's what they want, if they don't want that, it doesn't matter. And my commitment to you is that you no longer be committed to the psych ward. And my certification is no longer being certifiable. Yeah, so it's going to be fun to design this course, I think. And maybe I will talk a little bit about micronutrients. We are moved by the force of habit, or we create with the power of perception. We either reenact the past or see-enact and move in the new. We don't need to act on the world or react to the world, but act as the world. And asking what can I do is a projection. But asking what can I see, brings us in contact to what's now. And that's the only place that there is any power. Can we look at the now and as the now? So, micronutrients. I'm not sure how much depth I'm going to go into about this, but it could be quite a lot because it's important. And in one of the papers on micronutrients, I came across a study, antipsychotic maintenance treatment, time to rethink. And I wasn't planning on starting with this one because this isn't a paper about micronutrients at all, but it was referenced in one of the micronutrient papers. And interestingly enough, it says no funding was received for this work. And I'm pointing that out because the findings are something that any kind of sponsored study likely wouldn't have found. And the study is by Joanna Moncrieff. And the summary points illustrate what this is all about. It says, existing studies of long-term antipsychotic treatment for people with schizophrenia and related conditions are too short and have ignored the impact of discontinuation-related adverse effects. So I know all about these because that's what I was experiencing when I was tapering off the meds and onto the micronutrients. But the product specialist warned me about how I would feel worse before I felt better, as the nutrients were starting to do the work that the drugs were doing and then make me feel over-medicated. But the other thing is that there's an iatrogenic illness initiated by taking these drugs because we get addicted to them. So the withdrawal effects are often because we're adapted and addicted to these drugs, which we weren't before we started taking them. So then the withdrawal effects are from these adverse tapering responses because we're addicted to it. And the next point says, recent evidence confirms that antipsychotics have a range of serious adverse effects, including reduction of brain volume. And why this is huge for me to see in a study, it says recent evidence, antipsychotics reduce brain volume. And I'm planning on possibly going to this cognitive remediation conference in a month-ish. And it's going to be about all this hoopla, and I don't know what it's about. All this hoopla and apps and computer programs to help people get their cognitive decline due to their mental illness back. When this is saying here in this paper that antipsychotics shrink the brain. And of course, somebody's going to have cognitive decline if their brain is shrinking, for God's sakes. So in the cognitive remediation outline, it says, oh, cognitive remediation doesn't replace medications. So they're implying that people should always be on medications. And then do this hoopla of cognitive remediation technique or whatever, which just creates more jobs for people to live off the fact that people are suffering taking all these drugs. And down when the paper starts, it says that recent data from the United Kingdom indicate that 97.5% of mental health service patients diagnosed with schizophrenia are prescribed at least one antipsychotic. So people are on this stuff. Pretty much everyone is prescribed an antipsychotic. And then the current thinking is antipsychotic maintenance treatment, which means taking antipsychotics all the time, daily, for the rest of one's life, which is maintenance treatment. And this paper is about time to rethink, because the next point in the summary points, the first really long-term follow-up of a randomized trial found that patients with first episode psychosis who had been allocated to a gradual antipsychotic reduction and discontinuation program had better functioning at 7-year follow-up than those allocated to maintenance treatment, with no increase in relapse. So this is huge because usually studies are short, so they might show that antipsychotics really help. But what it's showing is when they followed up with people from a randomized control trial, 7 years later, the people that had reduced off of them were doing a lot better. So that's part of the time to rethink the maintenance treatment aspect. Further studies with long-term follow-up and a range of outcomes should be conducted on alternatives to antipsychotic maintenance treatment for people with recurrent psychotic conditions. So, I'm someone with a recurrent psychotic condition, and I have found an alternative, which is micronutrients. So they're already out there. So that's just the summary points. And so it starts with talking about how bad the impact is, and 80% of people diagnosed with schizophrenia have some ongoing social disability, and 97.5 are prescribed a drug. So it seems like if one gets a diagnosis, one has a 20% chance of not having some kind of social disability. So how do we up the chances that one will not have this social disability? And further down it says the practice of antipsychotic maintenance treatment is based on research believed to have established that continuous antipsychotic treatment reduces the risk of relapse. Interpreting the evidence is not straightforward, though, and other data are beginning to emerge that suggest that long-term treatment may have an adverse impact on levels of social functioning. It is time, therefore, to review the practice of antipsychotic maintenance treatment and question whether it should continue to be the default treatment strategy in people diagnosed with schizophrenia or similar psychotic disorders. And I do want to read more of this later for sure, but one part that caught my attention for now, because I do want to get onto the good news of micronutrients first, is that it says that at 7-year follow-up, however, relapses had equalized between the groups, and participants originally randomized to antipsychotic reduction and discontinuation were twice as likely to show a full social recovery as those allocated to the maintenance group. And so part of the question is, well, what are the alternatives to taking these long-term as a maintenance treatment? And it could be micronutrients. I won't have time to fully get into this, but I'll introduce it at least. I read 4 different studies. 3 are about micronutrients more so, and then 1 is related. And the first one is database analysis of adults with bipolar disorder consuming a micronutrient formula. This little blurb called Nutritional Approach to Bipolar Disorder. Do vitamins or minerals apart from lithium have mood stabilizing effects? Improving life expectancy in people with serious mental illness. Should we place more emphasis on primary prevention? So to sum up this paper, they're talking about how they're trying to introduce health monitoring for people that are diagnosed with a mental illness and on antipsychotics. So doing weekly weight monitoring during the first 6 weeks. And the dumb part of all of this, they're saying it's not really that helpful. What it really does is gets people on more drugs, like drugs for cardiovascular disease, and then a lot of times there's no proof these drugs even work, but and this part it says, and it's illustrated here where it says, a recent observational study evaluating the program found that those who attended were more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes, hypertension, and chronic kidney disease, and were most likely to be prescribed a statin than those that did not attend. So it's kind of like an interview to put people on more drugs. And then it says, however, several studies have indicated that physical health monitoring programs have limited benefits in terms of reducing morbidity and mortality. A systematic review of 16 randomized trials investigating clinical outcomes of physical health monitoring found that although screening programs resulted in an increase of the diagnosis of hypertension and hypocholesterolemia, they had no significant impact on cardiovascular morbidity or mortality. So it's just to make more money off the people who are slowly going to die faster anyway. And there's so much more to this paper, and this is where I found the link, the reference to the previous paper. And this one starts off by saying the same thing that I've talked about, substantially reduced life expectancy compared with the general population. And then the other part I found really fascinating in this paper was under choice and duration of antipsychotic prescribing, it says, there's growing debate about whether long-term treatment with antipsychotics is beneficial for all patients with schizophrenia, and not only because of their adverse metabolic effects, but also their long-term effects on brain structure and dopamine receptor function. So this is the part that interests me about the cognitive remediation conference. I doubt they're going to be talking about any of that. They're not going to be talking about how it messes up dopamine receptor function, how it has adverse long-term effects on the brain. They're blaming all that on the worsening of illness. And I don't have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, but this pisses me off. And under conclusion, it says people with serious mental illness die up to 20 years younger because of preventable physical disorders caused by the medications. They're saying what it does to the brain. They're saying there is also evidence to suggest that second-generation antipsychotic treatment is associated with higher risk of cardiovascular disease due to increased weight gain, dyslipidemia, and impaired glucose regulation. So it messes up our whole metabolism. And then this one about nutritional approach to bipolar disorder. So this part here by Dr. Simmons, who reports no financial or other relationships relevant to the subject matter of this letter. He had 19 patients, 12 of which showed marked clinical improvement on EMP, which is another micronutrient formula. So 10 marked responders, 3 moderate responders. 13 patients were able to completely discontinue psychiatric medication use over a mean of 5.2 weeks, range of 3 to 10 weeks, and remain stable on EMP alone. That's huge. Of the 12 marked improvement, 10 have remained on EMP. Current follow-up mean length 13 months. So over a year later, 10 of the 13 stayed on the micronutrient product. One of the 3 moderate responders has also continued on EMP, so that 11 of 19 patients have chosen to remain on EMP rather than psychiatric medications. Of the other 8 patients, 1 was lost to follow-up, 4 discontinued EMP because of gastrointestinal problems, 3 had recurrent symptoms, stopped EMP, and resumed psych meds. So 50% is a lot who can maintain themselves on EMP, because that creates a different trajectory. All of a sudden, now the person doesn't have all these deleterious effects of the antipsychotics that are outlined in the paper I just mentioned before. So it's not a matter of managing on meds versus micronutrients and, oh, it's just better to take the nutrients. It has profound effects on one's life, because now one doesn't have those 20 years of life lost due to the preventable physical ailments that are at least partially caused by the antipsychotics. And this is from 2003. When I was first hospitalized, I was put on olanzapine, and it's funny, the next letter here is olanzapine-induced fecal incontinence. I'm glad it didn't do that to me. It's funny, because it says, one can argue that the combined effect of olanzapine and other sedative drugs could have caused fecal incontinence, but complete recovery from incontinence followed withdrawal of olanzapine is sufficient evidence to document that olanzapine can cause fecal incontinence. So they have to add that to the list of possible side effects.
Maybe they should change the name to olanzapupin.
Oh my gosh, this is a funny last sentence. Our case would have been more convincing had we re-exposed the patient to experimentally prove the point, but we believed this approach to be unethical. We're just going to give you some more olanzapine to see if you shit your pants again. How do you feel about that? And again, I want to go into all the papers in more details, but I'm just looking over them for some initial things. And this one on about lithium, which is from 2001. It has a really stupid part in it. The possibility of a nutritional alternative to drug treatment may raise hope and carry the risk of igniting public interest beyond reasonable bounds. Some patients may find it difficult to wait for nutrient supplements to be examined in humans for both efficacy and safety in controlled trials, and clinicians will need to help patients keep their enthusiasm from pushing usage beyond its scientific basis. And what I've read in these studies is that this stuff helps 50% of people, and of those 50% of people, they become pretty much completely symptom-free. And that's 25%. That's a lot. So I'm wondering what makes it so it's not higher than that, for sure. But for them to say, oh, you shouldn't do this, I'm pretty sure this Dr. Popper has changed his tune since then. This part's really funny too. If Kaplan and colleagues' preliminary findings are confirmed in controlled research, and if safety studies are favorable, what then? What if some psychiatric patients could be treated with inexpensive vitamins and minerals rather than expensive patented pharmaceuticals? Or what if some doses of psychiatric drugs could be reduced by the concurrent use of micronutrients? The economic implications for individual patients and for the pharmaceutical industry are difficult to overlook, meaning it'll save patients a lot of money and it'll cost the pharmaceutical companies a lot of profits. Who gives a shit about the pharmaceutical companies' profits? Depending on how this line of research develops, clinicians and researchers may need to rethink the traditional bias against nutritional supplementation as a potential treatment for major psychiatric disorders. Who knew that science could be so funny? This one's really long and complex, and there's a lot I want to talk about in it, so I think I'll wait till later, but it's showing how many people do well, and I recommend reading it. It's so good. I just got a roll of sushi. Yam tempura roll as an appetizer for the dinner I'm going to make with some friends, because it's not one of those types of dinners where you can eat as much as you want, and I've been so ravenous lately. And I crossed a little stream to sit here, and I was crossing a log and I stepped in the water. So my shoe's a bit wet. It actually felt kind of nice. I like to eat sushi by myself because I eat like a pig. I don't know how to use chopsticks very well, so I usually revert to my hands at some point. So good.